Hi, good afternoon. I'm Judy Arteche-Carr, CEO and Managing Director of Arteche Global Group. And it's a pleasure to introduce Minerva Tantoco, Senior Advisor and Board Member of City Strategies, and also the former first Chief Technology Officer of the City of New York. And as the first CTO, she spearheaded a lot of initiatives such as the Internet of Technology, Link NYC, and CS for All. Link NYC indicating everybody in New York, and CS Technology, CS for All, computer science in all of the public schools. And her career also spans financial services, Merrill Lynch, and UBS, and she co-founded Grasshopper Bank, a digital commercial bank, which has been very successful to date. She also served as interim CEO of the New York Science of Hall of Science and Chief AI Officer at NYU's Silver Institute. And as an advisor in residence at EY, she focuses on applied AI, IoT, and digital transformation. And not only that, she holds 4 US patents on intelligent workflow and has led 3 successful startups and advised several more. And her awards include Best Smart City at Smart City World Congress, the AI Summit Decade of AI Influence AI Iconics Award, and of course, as well as being an AABTC award. And as you can see, she has reinvented herself several times, from a philosophy graduate to financial services to technology, inventor, investor, and now management consultant. Minerva Tantoco.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me here and on this. I love the topic, Beyond the Algorithm. I've been doing artificial intelligence for 40 years, F40. How many were born before? I started my first AI company in 1985 when I was still a senior in college. I was going to be, like all good Filipinos, a brain surgeon or something. And then instead, I thought I got an assignment to work on a computer, and I wanted to understand how to make a computer think. And this was in 1982 to 83. So by 85, I had the opportunity to start an AI company called an Expert System in Silicon Valley. While I was still a senior in school, and we sold that company 5 years later to Computer Associates. So I hope to bring a perspective to the question of leadership in the public sector in the age of AI, as someone who's been doing AI for 40 years, but also who has held a senior technology position, not only in private sector, but also in New York City government. So thank you for being willing to interview me, Judy, and let's get started. I'm going to talk fast like a New Yorker because we've got 10 minutes.
So let's start from your private sector to being a public servant. You made the leap from a successful career in the private sector to becoming New York's first ever Chief Technology Officer. What surprised you the most about that transition, and what experiences transferred directly, and what had to be completely unlearned? And not only that, what did governing at that scale teach you about leadership that the corporate world simply couldn't?
That's an excellent question, and I will start out by saying I highly recommend public service. I had spent many years in private sector. When I left the private sector, I was the Chief Technology Officer at UBS Bank. I had been the regional CTO for Asia Pac for 2 years out of Hong Kong. And when I came back to New York, I got the opportunity to be the first ever Chief Technology Officer of the City of New York. And it is an incredibly gratifying and interesting, probably one of the most interesting jobs I've had, and I've had lots of great jobs. And I highly recommend the impact that you can have in public sector. That being said, it was like stepping into opposite world, having been part of decision-making process, making big technical decisions for large global enterprises. Which cloud should we use? Which type of network should we use? In government, you're not necessarily the decider of the technology. So I really had to learn, I would say perfect, or really hone my ability to build consensus. Because whereas you can have authority in a particular role in the corporate world, everyone else has to agree with you and support you, and maybe even think it's their idea when you're in government. And so, I really just, even after I've left, I've been out of City Hall for 10 years now, but those skills that I learned in terms of how to convince people that it was their idea it's definitely useful to anyone. What transferred though was scale. Although New York City, for those of you who don't know, is New York City's largest employer, 325,000 employees. As of this year, $110 billion annual budget. Roughly 10% or 11 billion is spent on tech. There are 50 agencies and mayor's offices, which are each on their own, would be a large Fortune 500 company. The largest health and hospitals corporation, the largest public health system in the country, the largest public school system in the country with 1 million kids. That is bigger than the population of Estonia, right? So think about that kind of scale, and the fact that it is an extremely public role. You sort of use different muscles, I think, when you move from private to public sector. What I did bring along with me, though, was really interesting, and I think it was the value that I was able to bring to the table, was the experience in building large-scale IT infrastructure and managing multi-year, multi-billion-dollar tech projects is not something that there's a lot of expertise in government. And so, they're great at like building bridges and, tunnels and things like that, but technology expertise is not necessarily the top place. And so that's why it's so important to bring that technology expertise, innovation to government, because it serves so many more people.
Thank you. And Minerva, I remember when you first became CTO, you were into sustainability. So I remember you refused to have the car that they assigned to you. So in the middle of her term, she said, it's so hard because I have to get from one meeting place to another, and without a car, it's not easy. I remember that. Anyway, this morning, we spoke about a lot of uncertainty in this age of AI, so leading through uncertainty. So AI moves faster than any policy or org chart can keep up with. How can we make high-stakes decisions when the technology and its consequences are still unclear? And what's your advice to executives in the same position today?
The stakes are always very high. In large enterprises, I work at some of the world's biggest banks, And if you make a wrong decision, that can have severe, negative impact, both from an economic and financial, but also reputational risk. But if you take that and multiply it by 8 million New Yorkers and being on the world stage, the stakes are even higher when you're in a public role. And so, and that is why it is a special challenge to really want to do innovation, which is inherently risky, and at the same time, make sure that you're not doing everything you can to avoid negative impact on folks. And so a lot of this is to do with bringing risk management, having, the equivalent, tabletop exercises, what can go wrong, what happens if something does go wrong, what is the response going to be, and, especially when it comes to public services, the potential for positive impact is huge. You can get, public services to people faster, better. You can improve sustainability. You can make garbage truck routes more efficient. You can provide better education and training. You can detect, fraud. You can protect the people of New York or any municipality more effectively, make things safer, more sustainable. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you are optimizing for the right things and that you have a way to measure true outcomes. And in fact, it's sort of the same as like when people first came up with cars, there weren't speed limits and there weren't seatbelts. So we're now reaching the point that I think with AI, particularly with large language models, where we need seatbelts and we need we need speed limits because as they become more and more ubiquitous, you have the potential for negative safety impacts as well.
Thank you. The one thing that makes me curious also is that New York City is New York City, and there's a lot to, how did you deal with the political fallout or lobbying and that sort of thing in order to make the right decisions?
Well, this is, it's such an interesting question because this is a city that is kind of run by tabloids, and you want to, make sure that you're communicating with folks. I think for me, you can't let yourself be afraid of what the tabloids will say. When we completely re-platformed the public health system to an electronic medical record system, there were a lot of folks against it. They didn't like change, they didn't want that. But it turns out that because when we completed that, it was the year before COVID 2020, which was completed in 2019. And what it meant was that all of the public health system hospitals knew where all the beds were. They knew where the respirators were. They could track and use AI to see where there were surges in infections. So, to me, what sustained me throughout was this is technology that can really save lives, and in fact did. And so, I think if you keep your focus on what the public good will be, then you won't be so worried about the politics of it.
Yes, that's great. I agree with that. Thank you, Minerva. And this morning, Martin Rogers from Accenture also spoke about leadership and means trust and accountability. So going to governments, they've been early testing grounds for AI in areas like criminal justice, social services, and public safety with mixed results. Where do you see AI serve the public, and where have you seen it fail? What does it mean getting right actually require from leadership? How do you get it right?
Right, so in closing, because I have 2 seconds, what I'll say is this, you know, I'm not a doomer that says this is going to be the extinction of humanity, nor am I just a sort of a unthinking, you know, hype optimist person. If there was one takeaway that everyone in this room needs to know is that it's actually up to us what the ultimate impact of it is. So with transparency, meaning is this a robot, is it not a robot, is this a deep fake, is it real? With accountability, meaning who's actually responsible and who's accountable if the system does something wrong. With transparency and accountability, we have the ability to keep things safe and maintain the human aspects of technology. Technology should be here to augment us and give us superpowers. And to do that, we need to retain our human agency, make sure we keep the human in the loop, and make sure at every checkpoint that the outcomes are actually positively affecting us and not negatively. This is particularly true with bias embedded in algorithms, as we've seen in hiring algorithms, facial recognition. These are things that really need to be addressed before they get widely sent, because there's just following the patterns of the people that have trained the system so far, and they're not all people that look like us, right? Or educated or speak English like us. So even the ones that detect whether an LLM wrote your resume will have a false positive for people who English isn't their first language, right? And so it might accuse you of plagiarizing when in fact, no, it's just that English is not your first language and this is how you learned how to write at school. It might actually falsely assume that you wrote it with a robot. So these are things to be aware of. I think the future is bright, but we also have a huge role to play in it.
Thank you, and that goes to my question since this is a diverse audience, as AI accelerates, what advice can you give us on how to navigate our own leadership style in the advent of AI, specifically as you had mentioned in the advent of bias?
Right, so I think we're out of time, but for the last question, absolutely. In addition to being aware of potential bias and then what to do about it, when I was at NYU, we created data balancing algorithms to test whether data sets were balanced across multiple factors. So you can actually use technology to help you use the technology, but as well as continuing to raise your voice and your human characteristics to make sure that you're doing it. In fact, I think that a lot of the AI slop and samey stuff is actually going to bring up even more important, make even more important humanities background, make even more important creativity, collaboration, and your soft human skills are going to become even more important in the age of AI.
Thank you. Thank you, John. That's the reason why he's been raising our voice for 25 years now. Thank you.